At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the president of the School of Visual Arts, David Rhodes.
Thank you. And good morning. And it is morning, isn't it? Members of the board, honored guests, faculty, administration, parents, families, and most of all, soon-to-be graduates, I'd like to welcome you to SVA's 40th formal commencement exercises held in honor of the class of 2015. There is one person on this dais who's been at all 40 of those. Not me, Marshall Arisman. I think it would be best to begin by thanking a few of the people who've made today's event possible. First, I'd like to thank the Commencement Committee, Milton Glazer, Kevin O'Callahan, and Anthony Rhodes, who are chiefly responsible for the design of today's ceremony. I'd also like to thank Lucky Checkley, Director of Academic Advisement, and the academic advisors who have helped guide you here. Finally, I think we should all thank those parents, grandparents, friends, significant others, and in some cases children, whose emotional and financial support have enabled you all to reach this point. Thank you. Formal education is at the core of economic progress. The correlation between illiteracy and poverty is undeniable. The connection between average years of education and income, both individual and national, is uncontested. But formal education has been at the center of the struggle for equality and equity in the world, and especially in the United States. Some of you may be familiar with Brown v. Board of Education, the 1954 Supreme Court case that made school segregation unconstitutional. But Brown was the culmination of a series of higher education cases, beginning in 1936 with Murray v. Maryland, Missouri v. Canada, Sweat v. Painter, and McLaurin v. Oklahoma Board of Regents of Higher Education. These higher education cases laid the predicate for the K-12 ruling in Brown. Public education in the United States, whether higher or kindergarten through 12th grade, has always been a contested arena. The current contest centers around testing. As part of what was called educational reform, in 2001, Congress enacted and George W. Bush signed legislation entitled the No Child Left Behind Act. This was bipartisan, but not benign. The act mandated that students be tested annually and that satisfactory progress for all students be made on an annual basis. Those schools where programs were judged inadequate were deemed failing and subject to reorganization. The act mandated that all students in American public schools were supposed to be proficient by 2014. And they might have been, except the definition of proficient was changed. For example, in 2009, 77% of the students who took New York's statewide examination were found to be proficient in English. In 2010, the bar was raised so that only 57% were then proficient. Most recently, with another test, the statewide proficiency has dropped to 31%. Essentially the same children, in the same buildings, with the same teachers, but different engineered outcomes. The only difference was the test. It is becoming clearer that the test is flawed, not the students, not the teachers, and that those who assert that the tests provide useful information are increasingly less credible, if not diluted. So it is not surprising that some parents have had enough. In New York State, which permits parents to opt their children out of the tests, approximately 200,000, or 20%, of those eligible have done so this past April. This extraordinary act of non-cooperation seems unique in American educational history and may mark the beginning of the end of another depressing chapter in the seemingly endless school wars. Although this rather massive resistance to government dictates was largely underreported, it is nonetheless a fact that cannot be denied nor ignored. But unlike earlier confrontations, the most recent one cannot be ignored by the politicians because the parents leading this movement vote, and in large numbers. The tests at issue take 2 full weeks to administer. They are longer than the bar examination, which seems an undue burden for an 8-year-old child. But more importantly, the tests distort the educational process. It's incontrovertible that, unless the tests are purely diagnostic, and thus are not high stakes, teaching to the test is inevitable. Because only 2 subjects are tested, English and math, all other subjects are undervalued. Time on them is reallocated towards English and math, and some subjects, science, art, music, are often eliminated from the curriculum. The emaciated curriculum leads to an impoverished intellectual experience. Think about what your lives would be like without the arts. How many of you would have been here today if all you studied in school was English and math? How many of you would have thrived if the same examinations used to test elementary and secondary schools were forced upon graduate students? These questions answer themselves. My hope for you is that where you are making the great work we expect of you, that you will also become committed citizens who will ensure that whatever gains for the arts that these New York parents are striving for will be secured, generalized, and expanded. So, congratulations, you've made it. But don't forget to vote. Thank you.